4:47 a.m. Gwinnett County, Georgia. July 8, 2026. 12 federal agents stacked on the narrow front porch of a duplex on a quiet residential street off Buford Highway. Body armor. Flex cuffs. A hydraulic breaching tool positioned at the frame of the front door. The street was still. A single porch light burned amber 2 houses down. No dogs. No cars moving. The team leader raised 3 fingers. Then 2. Then 1. The door came off its hinges in one hit. What agents found in the next 4 minutes became one of the largest human trafficking indictments in Gwinnett County history. 13 young women. A single sealed room on the 2nd floor. A padlock on the interior stairwell door that had been bolted from the outside. The youngest was 22 years old. The oldest was 26. All 13 had been reported missing from addresses across northern Georgia. Some as recently as March of 2026. Some as far back as October of 2025. The operation was called Peach Ledger. It didn't start with a federal wiretap, an informant, or surveillance cameras. It started with a water meter. 3 months before the breach, a Gwinnett County Water Department field technician named Marcus Elroy was running routine rereads along his assigned grid on a Tuesday morning in early April 2026. Rereads are exactly what the name suggests, a second pass at meter data that flagged as inconsistent during the prior billing cycle. Clerical work. Administrative. The kind of task that fills the middle hours of a shift without demanding much thought. The duplex on his grid had flagged as inconsistent not once but 3 billing cycles running. Elroy pulled his tablet and scrolled the usage history. The upper unit of the duplex showed water consumption that had tripled since late November of 2025. The lower unit, occupied by a verified tenant, showed normal usage. The upper unit was listed to a limited liability company, a shell entity registered the previous August in Gwinnett County under a name that matched no visible business presence on the street. According to the LLC's registration, the upper unit was used for light commercial storage. No personnel, no residents. But the water usage told a different story. 13 people's worth of daily usage, at minimum, sustained over more than 4 months. Elroy flagged the anomaly in his reporting system. 2 lines. He noted the address, the LLC name, the usage spike, and a discrepancy date range. Standard protocol. He moved on to the next address on his grid. What he did not know, and would not learn until federal agents briefed him 6 weeks later, was that the same route that took him past the duplex that morning also took him past a strip mall staffing office on Buford Highway, 3/4 of a mile south. He had seen the same silver Chevrolet Malibu parked at the duplex and at the staffing office on the same morning. He had not written that detail down. It had not seemed significant. His supervisor, reviewing the anomaly reports at the end of that Tuesday, forwarded Elroy's 2-line note to Gwinnett County's utility fraud desk as routine follow-up. The fraud desk, understaffed and backed up, queued it for the following week. But one of the analysts at the fraud desk, a woman who had spent 11 years cross-referencing utility anomalies with code enforcement data, ran a quick cross-check before queuing it. The LLC name on the upper unit matched a prior flag from a Cobb County code enforcement report filed the previous January. The code enforcement flag was minor, a noise complaint, never substantiated, that had been closed without action. She sent the utility anomaly and the code enforcement cross-reference to a Gwinnett County Sheriff's liaison, who forwarded it to the FBI's Atlanta field office. The report landed on the desk of a Homeland Security Investigations Task Force coordinator on a Friday afternoon. The task force was already running a parallel investigation, a recruiter front probe focused on Buford Highway employment agencies that appeared to be steering vulnerable workers into coercive labor arrangements. One detail in Elroy's report stopped the coordinator cold. The LLC name on the duplex. It appeared in a subpoena return from a Buford Highway payroll processor that the HSI probe had already collected. The LLC had made 3 payments to the payroll processor between December 2025 and February 2026, payments described as administrative fees for worker placement services. 3 payments. For workers who, according to every record available, did not exist. The pieces sat in separate databases for months before anyone connected them. 11 months. Utility records in one county. Code enforcement flag in another. A subpoena return in a federal database that was never cross-referenced against local anomaly reports. The machinery of parallel jurisdiction meant that 13 young women spent 143 days in a sealed room, while 3 different agencies were, collectively, already holding the key. The HSI coordinator pulled the full utility record for the duplex. She pulled the LLC registration. She pulled the payroll processor's records for all 3 payments. And then she ran the LLC name against a 4th database, the FBI's Atlanta Field Office Missing Persons Tracking Index. One result came back immediately. A 24-year-old woman named Adriana Voss, a line cook at a North Atlanta restaurant group, had been reported missing by her sister on February 17, 2026. The missing person report had been filed with Cobb County Sheriff's Office, which had investigated for 3 weeks, found no evidence of foul play, and transferred the case to a cold file status in mid-March. Adriana's last known employer was a restaurant group that processed payroll through the same Buford Highway payroll processor that had received payments from the Duplex LLC. That connection, 1 woman, 1 employer, 1 payroll processor, 1 LLC, was the thread. I spent time going through the case file reconstruction, and the detail that kept nagging me was how ordinary it all looked on paper. An LLC, a payroll processor, an employment agency on a commercial strip. Every individual piece of it was invisible precisely because it was designed to look routine. The HSI coordinator briefed the Atlanta field office supervisor the following Monday morning. By Tuesday, a joint task force had been assembled, HSI Atlanta, FBI Atlanta, and a Gwinnett County Sheriff's liaison. The task force was given a preliminary operational window of 60 days. They needed probable cause for surveillance warrants on the duplex and the Buford Highway staffing office, and they needed it fast. The staffing office operated under the name Meridian Career Solutions. It had been registered as a Georgia LLC in the spring of 2024. Its listed services: hospitality staffing, restaurant placement, food service recruitment. Its listed owner was a man whose name appeared on no other public business registration in the state. The office had a phone line, a website with no contact form, and a single posted review on a local business directory, 5 stars, no text, posted by an account with no other reviews. The posting date was the same week the LLC registered. Meridian had placed workers at 17 businesses along a corridor running from Gwinnett County north into Hall County. 13 of those placements had generated complaints to the Georgia Department of Labor. Workers who had been promised wages and housing assistance arrived at placements and either stopped communicating with their families or formally reported conditions inconsistent with the terms they had been offered. Of the 13 complaint files, 9 had been referred to local law enforcement. Of those 9, 3 had generated missing person reports. Adriana Voss was one of them. The task force pulled all 3 missing person files. All 3 women had last been in contact with their families between late November 2025 and early February 2026. All 3 had responded to job postings, restaurant work, hospitality positions, described as offering housing assistance and transportation from their current locations in North Georgia. All 3 had told family members they were starting a new job. None of them had started a new job. One of them, a 23-year-old named Priya Delacroix from a town 40 miles northeast of Atlanta, had texted her mother on November 28, 2025. The text said she had arrived safely and the place seemed nice. That was the last communication her mother received. Priya's name, along with those of the two other identified missing women, was added to the task force's operational file. The working theory, Meridian Career Solutions, was a recruiter front using the promise of legitimate restaurant and hospitality work to move young women from North Georgia service jobs into circumstances that were not what had been advertised. The duplex was a holding location. The padlocked stairwell door and the tripled water usage, taken together, indicated that multiple people were being housed in the upper unit under conditions inconsistent with voluntary residence. The task force needed to confirm who was inside the duplex without alerting anyone to the investigation. They could not approach the building directly. Any unusual foot traffic on the residential block risked tipping off whoever was managing the property. They could not use aerial surveillance without court approval. They needed a warrant, and for a warrant, they needed more than anomaly reports and a theory. The obstacle was time. Every day of surveillance work was another day inside that sealed room. The task force's solution was methodical and deliberate. They worked the financial thread. The LLC's bank account, obtained through a subpoena to a regional bank on the third day of the investigation, showed a pattern of regular cash deposits, $400 to $600, 3 to 4 times per week, always at the same branch in Duluth, always made by the same individual. The deposits had begun in late October 2025, roughly 6 weeks before the first utility spike, and had continued through the first week of July 2026. The individual making the deposits was identified through branch security footage as a man who matched a Georgia driver's license belonging to a 38-year-old resident of Lawrenceville named Devlin Marsh. Marsh had 2 prior Georgia convictions for financial fraud and a federal probation hold from a 2019 wire fraud case in Tennessee. He was not the registered owner of the Meridian Career Solutions LLC, but he was connected to it through a second LLC, a holding company registered in Wyoming with no Georgia filing, that had made a single payment to the Meridian payroll account in January 2026. The task force identified 4 individuals connected to the operation by the end of the 3rd week of investigation. Devlin Marsh, the deposits and financial management. A woman named Cassandra Pruitt, 41, who appeared on surveillance footage entering and exiting the duplex 3 times in a 10-day period, always arriving in a white Ford Transit and always leaving without the transit's cargo door being opened. A man identified as Terrence Okello, 34, who was the registered owner of the Meridian LLC and whose phone appeared on cell tower data near the duplex on 14 separate dates between November 2025 and June 2026. And a 4th individual, a man known in the operational file only as the logistics coordinator, who had not yet been fully identified. The 5th individual, and the one the task force considered most operationally significant, was known only by a nickname that appeared in 2 intercepted communications. He was believed to be the originator of the recruiter front model, the architect who had identified Buford Highway as a recruitment corridor, who had established the LLC structure, and who managed the upper-level contacts that received whatever product the operation generated. His real name was unknown. His location was unknown. The task force requested a full electronic surveillance package from a federal magistrate on May 22, 2026. The warrant covered the duplex, the Meridian office, and 4 cell numbers associated with the identified suspects. It was approved the following morning. What's most surprising about this case isn't what the surveillance revealed about the duplex. It's what it revealed about the scale of the network feeding into it. Within the first week of electronic coverage, agents identified contact between Okello and individuals in 2 other Georgia counties, as well as a series of encrypted messages that referenced locations in South Carolina and Tennessee. The Gwinnett Duplex appeared to be one node in a corridor that extended well beyond northern Georgia. The task force briefed the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Georgia on June 2, 2026. Prosecutors requested patience. They wanted the full network mapped before any arrests. Every day of additional surveillance was evidence that could not be obtained once the arrests began. The part that didn't sit easily with anyone on the task force: the investigation ran 43 days on electronic surveillance, while 13 young women were inside that building. Agents knew, within a reasonable probability, that the duplex held people being kept against their will. They also knew that a premature breach, one that failed to result in enough arrests to dismantle the network, could allow the upper-level operators to scatter and rebuild elsewhere, taking the victims with them. That decision, to hold the surveillance window open as long as operationally defensible, is the one that the task force supervisor would later describe to federal prosecutors as the hardest of his career. This'll probably get pushback. 43 days is too long. The investigative case for patience was real. The legal logic was sound. But it was the people inside that building who bore the cost of that logic, and no amount of courtroom sentencing math changes what those 43 days cost them. The system made the tactically correct call, and the morally uncomfortable one simultaneously. By late June 2026, prosecutors had enough. The U.S. Attorney's Office authorized indictments for all 5 suspects. The fifth, the unknown architect, whose real name had finally been identified through a financial wire traced to a Gainesville, Georgia address, was named as DeAndre Halloran, 46, a former hospitality industry consultant with prior civil fraud judgments in 2 states and a dismissed federal conspiracy charge from 2017. Halloran had, by the time the indictments were sealed, already left the Gainesville address. Cell tower data placed him moving north on Interstate 985 toward Hall County on the evening of July 7th, the night before the raid. Either Halloran had been tipped off, or the timing was coincidental. The task force chose to treat it as a compromise and accelerated the operational timeline by 12 hours. At 11:45 p.m., on July 7, 2026, the task force supervisor called an emergency briefing. 47 people were in the room: HSI agents, FBI special agents, Gwinnett County Sheriff's deputies serving as perimeter support, and 2 supervisors from the Georgia State Patrol. The raid that had been planned for 5 a.m. was moved to 4:47. There was a second complication. The floor plans for the duplex, obtained through county building records, showed the interior stairwell as open access. But 2 separate sets of surveillance photographs, taken through a telephoto lens from a rented house 3 blocks away, showed a steel door at the base of the stairwell that did not appear in the building plans. The door had been installed after the property's last permitted renovation, sometime between 2022 and the LLC's acquisition in August 2025. The breaching team adjusted. The hydraulic tool deployed at the front door would be followed immediately by a second team with bolt cutters and a portable cutting tool at the stairwell door. Timeline estimate: entry to stairwell clearance, 90 seconds. Stairwell to upper floor, 40 seconds. Upper floor clearance, variable. Medics were staged in the driveway. 3 ambulances, 2 from Gwinnett County EMS, and 1 from a neighboring county requested as backup, parked with engines off on the cross street. IV lines were prepared and waiting. Blankets. A translator, a Spanish-English interpreter from a Gwinnett County social services contractor, was in the rear of the 3rd vehicle. At 4:47 a.m. on July 8, 2026, the team moved. The front door came down in 4 seconds. Devlin Marsh was found in the downstairs bedroom. He came to the door in response to the breach and was taken to the floor and cuffed before he reached the hallway. Cassandra Pruitt was found in the kitchen. She did not resist. Terrence Okello was on the rear porch and ran 3 steps toward the back fence before 2 deputies cut off the exit. He went down in the grass. He was uninjured. A 4th individual, the man the task force had identified as the logistics coordinator, whose name was Marcus Yellen, 31, was found in the downstairs bathroom and surrendered without incident. 4 suspects in custody within the first 90 seconds of the breach. The second team was already at the interior stairwell door. The padlock on the exterior of the stairwell door was a heavy gauge model that resisted the bolt cutters for 11 seconds before the cutting tool removed it. The team breached the stairwell and moved up 14 steps to the upper landing. There were 2 rooms on the upper floor. The first door, a standard residential interior door, opened into an empty space used for storage. Boxes, folding chairs, a portable generator that had been used to power a space heater. The second door was solid core. It was locked from the outside with a second padlock, heavier than the one on the stairwell. It took 19 seconds to remove. The team leader pushed the door open. The room was approximately 400 square feet. The 2 windows had been covered with 3/4-inch plywood sheets screwed into the window frames from inside, a detail that would appear in the indictment as evidence of deliberate isolation. A single LED work light on an extension cord provided the only illumination. 13 young women were in that room. Some were awake. Some woke when the door came open. All of them moved away from the door before the team leader identified himself and his agency. The team leader later told federal prosecutors that the moment of identification, announcing federal agents, holding his badge at chest height, waiting for the women to hear him, and process that the door was open, was 11 seconds long. He counted them. Medical personnel were inside the room within 4 minutes of breach. All 13 women received on-site evaluation. 7 were transported to area hospitals for treatment consistent with prolonged confinement. The remaining 6 were transported in 2 vans to a federal victim services facility in Gwinnett County, where medical evaluation continued. The youngest recovered was 22 years old. 3 of the 13 had been inside that room since October or November of 2025, more than 200 days. Adriana Voss was among those transported to the hospital. Her sister was contacted by a federal victim advocate at 5:22 a.m., 35 minutes after the breach. The call lasted 1 minute and 40 seconds. Priya Delacroix was among those transported to the victim services facility. Her mother drove from her town 40 miles northeast of Atlanta and arrived at the facility at 7:15 a.m. The reunion was not filmed by any federal agency. There was a detail that stuck with me from reading through the operational file. The plywood on the windows had been installed from the inside, which means, at some point, someone had been inside that room with a drill. And the women had watched it happen. Meanwhile, 60 miles north, DeAndre Halloran was moving. GSP had a plate on his vehicle, a black GMC Yukon registered to a Gainesville address, before 6 a.m. Cell tower pings put him on Interstate 985 northbound, moving toward Hall County at a speed consistent with highway travel. A U.S. Marshals Task Force coordinator, briefed at 5:15 a.m., activated a multi-vehicle intercept. Halloran made it as far as a truck stop at the Hall County line. At 6:48 a.m., 4 GSP units and 2 Marshals vehicles executed a rolling containment on the Yukon in the truck stop parking lot. Halloran made no attempt to flee on foot. He was removed from the vehicle at gunpoint and placed in federal custody without incident. A search of the Yukon recovered 2 prepaid phones, a laptop in a carry case, and approximately $18,000 in cash separated into envelopes. By 7 a.m. on July 8, 2026, all 5 defendants were in federal custody. The indictment, unsealed that afternoon in the Northern District of Georgia, charged all 5 with conspiracy to commit forced labor, transportation of persons for illegal purposes, and document servitude. The document servitude charge related to evidence recovered from the duplex, identity documents belonging to 7 of the 13 recovered women, found in a fireproof lockbox in the downstairs bedroom where Devlin Marsh had been sleeping. The women's identification had been taken from them. The indictment also charged Halloran alone with a money laundering count, based on the wire transfers identified during the financial investigation. The count alleged that proceeds from the operation had been moved through at least 3 entities: the Gwinnett LLC, the Wyoming Holding Company, and a third LLC registered in Florida, over a period of approximately 14 months. Would you have noticed the signs before it got this far? 13 missing persons reports filed across multiple counties. Labor complaints to a State Department that never triggered a cross-reference. A utility anomaly sitting in a queue for a week before anyone forwarded it. Not one of those systems failed catastrophically. Each one worked exactly as designed. And collectively, they almost weren't enough. The question isn't whether the investigative machinery caught the operation. It did, eventually. The question is what parallel jurisdiction costs, in days, when the people inside are counting them. The 4 defendants taken at the duplex entered initial pleas in federal court the week of July 14, 2026. Attorneys for Devlin Marsh indicated he would cooperate with prosecutors. If cooperation proceeds, federal investigators expect Marsh's debriefing to identify additional network nodes, additional locations, additional LLC structures, additional recruiters operating along the Buford Highway corridor. Those investigations, if opened, have not been publicly confirmed. DeAndre Halloran retained private counsel and has not entered a plea as of the time of this account. His attorney has characterized the charges as overstated and the financial evidence as circumstantial. The 2 prepaid phones recovered from his Yukon have been sent to the FBI's Digital Forensics Laboratory in Quantico. Results have not been publicly disclosed. Will we find more locations? Drop yes or no in the comments. Investigators working this corridor believe the Gwinnett Duplex was one site among several. The Florida LLC, identified in the money laundering count, has been served with a federal asset freeze order, but the underlying funds, estimated by prosecutors at somewhere between $200,000 and $400,000, moved through the entity, have not been recovered. The account was emptied approximately 18 days before the raid. Whoever moved the money knew, or suspected, what was coming. That question, who moved the money and when they knew, is one the task force has not closed. Meridian Career Solutions, the Buford Highway staffing office, was shuttered by federal order on July 8th. Its phone line was disconnected. The website went offline within hours. The 17 businesses where Meridian had placed workers over the preceding 2 years have each been contacted by federal investigators. 11 have provided cooperation. 6 have not yet responded. Those 6 businesses remain under review. The 13 recovered women are in the care of federal victim services and connected legal aid organizations. Their names have not been publicly disclosed and will not be by this account. Their status, their next steps, their futures, those belong to them and the people who love them, not to the public record of a federal case. Marcus Elroy, the water department field technician who flagged the 2-line anomaly that started all of this, filed his report and went on to the next address on his route. He did not learn his report had reached the FBI until weeks later. He has not been publicly identified as an operative or a hero. He did his job. The machinery that was supposed to catch things like this caught it. Barely. In time. The network that ran through the Gwinnett Duplex is now formally dismantled. The 5 people who operated it are facing decades in federal prison. The 13 women who were recovered on the morning of July 8, 2026, have access to services, to legal support, to the beginning of whatever comes next. What none of that addresses, who moved the money before the freeze order landed? Whether there are other locations the financial trail hasn't reached yet. Whether the encrypted communications recovered from Halloran's devices will open additional cases or close quietly in a digital forensics queue in Quantico. Operation Peach Ledger is, on paper, a closed case. 4 defendants in custody. 1 fugitive caught within hours. An indictment that covers the core conspiracy from recruitment, through confinement, through financial movement. But the staffing model that Meridian represented, the recruiter front approach, job postings targeting young women in service industries, the LLC shell architecture, the Buford Highway corridor, that model did not originate with DeAndre Halloran, and it will not end with his arrest. The duplex is empty. The padlock is in an evidence locker at the Gwinnett County Sheriff's Evidence Facility. The plywood is still on the windows. The demand that built that room still exists.